Hi, this is Tim Cool. I'm the founder of Smart Church Solutions. And this video is going to be brought to you by the Council for Facility Stewardship. So thanks for joining us. This is course 100. And we've entitled this The Theology of Life Cycle Planning, Retirement Planning for Your Church Facility. We're going to take a little different approach to life cycle planning to try to help make a point. And so this course is really kind of a primer of life cycle planning, capital reserves, that whole topic. So we're gonna stay fairly broad on it, but we're trying to give a good overview of what we mean by that. And there's going to be other courses that we're going to be offering in the near future that will dive deeper into this. But let's kind of go ahead and get started with this. So kind of our word that is kind of underlying all of this is inevitable, meaning it's certain to happen. It's impossible to avoid. It's certain, it's definite. When we think in terms of our facilities and we think of the inevitability of needing to replace certain things and there's being end of life, we're not talking about if we're going to have to replace them. It's more of a when and how much. It is inevitable that there are going to be certain things that are going to have to be dealt with our facilities long term. And so all the more need to understand life cycle planning and capital reserve planning. So let's take just a little diversion here. How many of you are planning for retirement? Obviously, I can't see your hands right now, but think about that. I've reached an age where retirement is closer to me than it used to be. Although I'm not sure that my wife will ever let me retire because I probably drive her nuts. But think about that. How many of us are personally planning for retirement? You know, there's all sorts of funding options. Security, maybe not, depending on your age. There's 401ks, 403bs. There's solo 401ks, SEP IRAs, Roth IRAs, so on and so forth. There's a whole slew of different vehicles that can be used for our personal retirement planning. So there's 7 steps that I found, obviously on the internet, because that's where we find everything, right? So 7 steps to prepare for your upcoming retirement. And don't lose me, or don't let me lose you at this point in time. I want to make sure that we kind of see this correlation between the attention that we give to our personal retirement versus the attention we give to the retirement of our facilities. So the first thing is make sure you're diversified and investing for growth. Second, take advantage of retirement accounts, especially catch-up contributions. The next 3 is downsize your debt. That's obviously smart. Calculate your likely retirement income. How much are you going to need to live? Have you actually kind of thought that through, and have you added an inflation factor to it? Recalculate your budget and look for cost savings options. Are there things that you're currently spending money on now that you don't need to? Estimate your retirement expenses, and then consider future health costs. What might be medical costs down the road? So those are 7 real basic steps. And I even found this really cool retirement calculator. What a novel concept, and I'll explain more on that why later. But you can find these on the internet just about anywhere, where you can plug in return on investments and inflation and potential Social Security, and you can get a pretty quick determination whether or not you are properly planning for it or not. But there are also then several mistakes that most people take when it comes to planning your retirement. People just generally fail to plan, and that's just terrible. There is no plan, and most people spend more time planning their vacations than they do their financial future. They don't save enough. And this is a crisis that we see when people have to downsize into something much smaller than what they were used to during their working years. It's because they didn't save enough. According to the Federal Reserve, the median balance of retirement savings for Americans is only $60,000. If you're in the age bracket of 35 to 40, your retirement savings right now is only about $42,000. And the retirement median for people in my age bracket that are nearing retirement is on average only about $103,000. Well, I think we all would agree that those numbers are probably grossly undershot unless we live off the grid in a cabin in West Virginia and we don't pay taxes. No offense to my friends in West Virginia. So we don't save enough money. The next one is we don't save early enough. And I have to admit, this is where I got to shine the mirror. I was not very good at saving early in my business and my professional career. But it is a whole lot easier to start setting aside money for retirement the younger you are. Too many people rely on Social Security or a company pension. What is a company pension? I haven't seen one of those in years. And it's just, that is a disaster waiting to happen. We really need to take retirement planning into our own hands and not rely on a third party to do that for us. The next is no rollover. They're not rolling over. So people change jobs and they leave cash in previous 401ks or other retirement accounts and never pull that money out and move it over. That's just a significant waste of money. The number 6 item is people underestimate their healthcare costs. Well, people say, well, I'll have Medicare. Well, you may, but think about what the inflation was. If you look at that graphic, prices have grown since 1945 and what they might cost somewhere down the road. It's just amazing the inflation factor when you look at what healthcare has done. So, I mean, healthcare has gone up so significantly that if milk would have kept up at the same pace as healthcare, we'd be paying $48 a gallon right now for milk. Well, most of us are probably paying $4, $5, $6 a gallon for milk, but our healthcare cost is through the roof. As a small business owner myself, I can tell you that since the Obamacare insurance took place, and I'm not disparaging that, but since that took place, my health insurance costs have about quadrupled in costs just to have the basic coverage and to have enough reserves to cover incredibly high deductibles now at this point in time in my life. The next one is we spend too much or too little. You're not going to die regretting having money left over. You'll regret the death of your savings before you die, though. I know when my dad was planning his retirement, he wanted to make sure he had enough money set aside that could generate income for him until he was 100. Now, Dad only lived to 90, which was a great old age, but he had it planned that he had enough money he could live to 100. So let's review. To prepare for your upcoming retirement, make sure you're diversified in investment growth and you're taking advantage of retirement accounts, especially catch-up accounts. Now, those two don't necessarily apply to facility retirement, but to a degree they might, and I can explain later. So again, to be prepared, downsize your debt. So this applies to us as churches as well. We should be looking to downsize our debt, and you should start doing that today. Next is calculate your retirement income. What is projected income and growth of your church over the next X number of years, maybe even the next 20 to 30 years? Can you project that? And then reevaluate your budget and look for cost savings options. Is there fat that can be reduced now? Are you spending too much on utilities? Do you know whether or not you're spending too much on utilities? And if so, what if you could reduce that cost? And if you could roll that then into some kind of a savings type of program. Next is estimate your retirement expenses. How much will you need to budget for operations and reserves, both now and in the future? Consider your future medical or health costs. Think in terms of what will be needed to keep the building healthy going forward. So when we look at these mistakes that too often happen, we have no plan. That's just kind of a duh. Too often we just don't plan. We don't save enough, which is very typical. We don't save early enough. So it makes it hard to catch up. Because when you start thinking of retirement savings, one of the beauties of starting earlier is the idea of the compound effect and how your money can compound over time. We rely on Social Security or other programs. I mean, really, that's just not a really smart idea. We spend instead of rollover, meaning you don't use your funds that you already have. You underestimate your health costs, and then you poorly utilize the funds that you have saved. So being a Christian isn't easy, but the retirement plan is amazing. And that's true for our personal lives and our souls. Doesn't always work that well when we're thinking about the retirement plan of our facilities. So let's look at this a little bit more. What are the things that we would all say are inevitable about facilities, particularly our church facilities? Number one, you will pay for utilities. Again, unless you are totally off the grid with solar energy and not reliant on any other public utility, you are paying for utilities. Number two, you will clean your facility. It's what degree, and that's a whole nother story. We'll deal with cleaning in future courses. Number three, you will maintain your facility to some level. You're going to do general maintenance and repair. And depending on how you address number three, you may or you will have deferred maintenance. If you don't spend enough money on maintaining your building, you will have deferred maintenance. And we're going to have a whole nother series of courses on deferred maintenance. And then fifth, this is an inevitable. This is not a maybe. You will retire a large portion of your facility components. This is just an inevitability. So let's face the inevitable. And let's look at some life cycle planning realities. And first, let's look at three basic facts about life cycle and the condition of our buildings. Number one, all buildings deteriorate at an average rate of 1 to 4% a year. This is a number that we received several years ago from IFMA and a national study that they did. So this is not exclusive to churches. All buildings are made of some form of natural resource that is going to deteriorate. Even man-made resources deteriorate. So all buildings are going to deteriorate at a certain rate. As such, nearly every physical component of your facility will be replaced or have a major overhaul. Now, you may not replace the footings, you may not replace structural steel components, but you will replace every air conditioner. You will replace every light at some point in time. You're going to replace all of your blacktop and your roofing and your floor finishes and your paint and windows and doors and on and on and on. So all the above are going to require dollars, not the hope of dollars, not the wishful thinking of dollars. It's going to require dollars. I'm yet to find any subcontractors, at least in our neck of the woods here in North Carolina, that are willing to replace my roof for the exchange of fur pelts or goats and sheep. They're looking for dollars. So we need to be prepared with the necessary dollars to handle these things. Which brings us to life cycle. So life cycle is basically a fancy term for the stages in which a building goes through. So buildings start with planning, it moves to design and construction, commissioning, which is kind of a new term in the last 10 or 12 years, which is basically confirming by engineers that what was designed was actually built. And then the next piece is facility management. And too often, the facility management part of this life cycle gets left out, and we don't think of it in the same intentionality that we do during planning and design. And that's unfortunate because it is, as I'm going to show you in a little bit, it actually is the biggest cost of owning a building over the 40-year period of a building's life cycle. Here's maybe another way to put it. So think of this as the stages of human development. So during the prenatal stage, there's not a whole lot of need for capital renewal money. You know, it's the original construction. You're building the building. The next stage, let's just call it childhood. So this green line kind of represents your routine maintenance. And if you notice, the routine maintenance line is consistent across all of the stages because routine maintenance should be the same other than basic inflation. What we get confused with is that red line, which is capital renewals. So think about this. In years 1 through 16, you're going to have some renewals, probably starting about the midpoint of that stage of life. So during that childhood stage, you may replace floor finishes. You may, depending on the grade of carpet, you may be replacing carpet. You may be resealing parking lots. You may also, as you start approaching the end of that childhood, you may also be replacing air conditioning units. If we listen to most of the manufacturers, and if you get DX equipment, you're going to be looking at about a 15-year life cycle. Also, if depending on your roofing material, if you got a 10-year roof or a 15-year shingle, you may be looking at approaching the end of life. So there in that childhood stage, you've got your routine maintenance, but now you start needing to spend capital renewals. So what happens if you don't have those renewals in place? Well, you end up with deferred maintenance. So renewals need to be started during that prenatal stage. You need to start planning for them early on. The next stage, adolescence, again, routine maintenance stays the same. The capital renewals increases. We get to years 30 to 49, and capital renewals is rampant. Think about it. By the time you reach age 30 to 49, you may have replaced certain air conditioning units 2 or 3 times. You may be replacing the roof for a second time. You may be replacing parking lots and flooring. Flooring may be the 4th or 5th time that you're replacing it. But you're then also in that stage likely to be doing some adaptations and upgrades. And so things like converting from incandescent lights to LED lights are not a capital renewal. That is an adaptation and an upgrade. So again, capital renewal is replacing an item at the end of its remaining useful life. Upgrades are taking components of your building and upgrading them to a better standard than they were before. We get into old age, and I can relate to this. You're going to be having routine maintenance, capital renewals, and some continued adaptations and upgrades. So you can kind of see how this capital renewals is not something that's just down the road. It's something that you actually need to start planning on really, really early in the life stage of your building. So I mentioned earlier about the cost of ownership. So we did an assessment a number of years ago for a magazine that asked us, what does it cost to own a building? Not what does it cost to build a building. Cost of building a building is pretty easy to determine. What does it cost to own a building? So we did a study. We looked at a building and said, okay, if this building is X square footage and you build it for X dollars per square foot, and then you factor in best practices for maintenance, repairs, utilities, janitorial, capital reserves, over a 40-year life cycle. And the reason 40 years was used is that seems to be industry standard. And frankly, if you're not going to build a building that can last 40 years, you probably shouldn't build a building. But when you look at that total cost of ownership, about only 20% of that cost was the actual sticks and bricks to build. There's about 3% cost in design and construction management fees. If you borrowed a certain amount of money, you may have 6% or so of the cost in interest that you've paid, what's referred to as the cost of money. But over 71% of your total cost of ownership is in the operational costs. So when we start thinking about the cost of owning a church building, we need to think way beyond the cost of sticks and bricks, because the reality is the cost of owning it is far greater than the cost of building it. And this is going to be perpetual cost until either Jesus comes back and takes us all back to heaven, or you decide to abandon the buildings altogether. So about the time that we did that resource, I received a call from engineers at State Farm Insurance. They had just done a study on 40 and 50-year-old buildings. They found that their operational cost was 80% of the life cycle. And a book that I found from the 1960s by an architect, his premise was that 85% was operations. Well, we did not include insurance in our number. So if you add insurance costs over a 40-year period of time, my guess is they're 80 to 85% is probably much more in line. But regardless, whether it's 71% or 85% of the total cost of ownership, it's a big, big number, and we need to take it seriously. So let's look at capital reserves then. So what is a capital reserve? A capital reserve is an amount of money that a company or organization keeps in a special account for future needs. So there's three primary comments there. One is money. It's real money. It's greenback. It's currency. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the hope of money. It's not the promise that someone might give you money. And frankly, it should not be money that you borrow. The second is it's in a special account, or at least in the very least, it's designated. So it's not to be commingled with other general budget type of line items. And third, it is for the future. It's down the road, not now. Think about, again, going back to your personal retirement plan. Most of us would not put money into an IRA this year with the anticipation that we're going to spend it next year. The anticipation is we put it in there so that it will grow over time until a point that we need it. The same applies for a capital reserve account. Your capital reserve account cannot be seen as a slush fund or a rainy day fund. Again, the drumbeat to continue to deal with here is this is inevitable. If you take money out of a capital reserve account to pay for a missions trip that got underfunded, some point in time, you're going to need that money to replace an air conditioning unit. And so you need to be very, very cautious not to rob Peter to pay Paul when you know that Peter's or Paul's still going to have to be paid for at some point in time. So how much is enough? That's a great question. And we recommend doing things on a line item basis. We've got some rules of thumb that we can share, and we probably will in other courses about, maybe it's $2 a square foot annually. Maybe it's $3 a square foot annually, $4, whatever it might be. A lot of it depends on the condition of your building, the age of your building, and so on. And those would be annual numbers. So think about this, run the number real quick. If you need $3 a square feet, how many square feet do you have? And if you set aside $3 a square feet to go into a capital reserve account year after year after year, what would that do to your facility's budget? So one of the tools that we recommend people use is we have a free tool called a life cycle calculator that's part of our eSpace platform. I've got the URL there at the bottom of the screen. But this allows you to line item things based on current replacement cost, remaining useful life, an inflation factor. So let's just take that top item there. If I have an elevator that today the current replacement value is $52,000, and if I am going to have 20 years remaining useful life, assuming that I maintain it properly, and if I use a 3% inflation factor, that's the number under the words life cycle calculator, then in 20 years, I need almost $94,000. These are huge numbers that our finance committee and team need to understand. So that means I need to be setting aside about $4,700 every year in a capital reserve account that's going to grow over time in order to have almost $94,000 in the bank in 20 years. Everything that has a life cycle in your building should be listed out like this. And it doesn't just have to be building components. Think about everything in your building that has a life cycle. Copy machines, printers, computers, microphones, speaker systems, chairs, pews, even trees outside have a life cycle. Your vehicles have life cycles. So this can become as extensive as you want. But whether you use this free tool or you use a spreadsheet or you do some other thing, it's critical that you understand what are the funds that you're going to need long term. I love this quote, in the long run, we only hit what we aim at. So one of my favorite authors, a man by the name of Seth Godin, says, I hope we can all agree that the long run is made up of a bunch of short runs. That seems obvious. The surprising thing is that we live our short runs as if that isn't true. So in the case of facilities, the long run is the replacement of our components of our facility that we'll have to retire. But in order to be ready for that, there's a bunch of short runs that we need to do in order to prepare for it. We need to save a certain amount year after year. Another short run is to maintain them. Proper preventive maintenance and proper corrective maintenance are things that need to be done in order to be prepared for that long run. Facility management is not a short run kind of game. It is a long-term planning out kind of thing. If you do not do the planning for the long run, you will constantly be in reactionary mode. So as I mentioned, this was just a primer to give you kind of my theology on capital reserves and life cycle planning. So in future courses, we're going to have topics such as how do you determine the remaining useful life of a piece of equipment? What major systems ages and projected replacement costs? Replacement versus continual repairs. This is a key factor. Is if I have money set aside for replacement, and I notice that I keep spending money on an air conditioning unit over and over in a year that I'm planning to replace next year, doesn't it make sense to go ahead and just replace it a year early and stop all the bleeding? How much is enough? How to help our finance team see the importance of this. We want to provide you the right tools and the understanding to help you communicate that this inevitability is coming down the path. And then what is capital renewal and what is general maintenance? There's a difference between the two of those. And there's going to be other topics as well. So thank you for taking your time to watch this course. I hope that it's been helpful. We look forward to seeing it at one of the next courses. Have a great day.